Thank you again as we keep searching for answers. We're glad that you've joined us. Please get your different interpretations of the Bible and read along with us as we wrestle with some of the questions that are kind of hard to understand, but we have faith and that Jesus will make it plain to us. On my right is
John Jones, La Sierra University.
John Brunt, the Azure Hills Adventist Church.
Ivan Blazin, Loma Linda University.
And if you will turn your Bibles to chapter 17 in the book of Luke, we just got through the first few verses of it, and I'm going to ask John Jones to read the first few verses and then we'll discuss it again. Okay?
Well, right back to the beginning of the chapter then? Or, what should we do
You
here?
can just go ahead,
Okay.
sure.
We managed last time to talk about verses 5 and 6 of that famous tree. We probably should take a quick look at that and then go on.
Right.
The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." And the Lord replied, "Well, if you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you."
What?
So much for mulberry.
So much for you.
Excuse me. I had a mulberry tree in my backyard a while back.
Didn't
and
you
it
like
was
it?
It was a bone of contention between me and my neighbor who lived higher up on the hill.
Yeah.
We could
Why?
only afford to live on the lower part of the hill,
Yeah.
but it blocked his view, and we had a good deal of negotiation about the fate of that mulberry tree. I believe that if he could have, he would have uprooted it and planted it in the sea. But, you know, there are several ways to come at this. One is, of course, to say, well, if you have faith, and what you're requiring is within the will of God, yeah? Or if it's for a good and spiritual purpose. Or we can somehow spiritualize the whole thing and say, well, Jesus didn't really mean it literally. Which of those choices would you like to go for?
Well, if you were to take it literally, it could almost make faith sound like a magic show.
That's right.
Couldn't it?
That's absolutely
right,
right. That'd be a good sermon title, John. Faith as a magic show. Now, all of us are going to go out and preach it, I'm sure.
Yeah, faith is not to be reduced to the quarter that you, or the 75 cents now that you put in the soda pop machine. You know, that's not what faith is.
No.
Doesn't work that way.
Well, let's up the ante here. We're talking about mulberry trees, but let's talk about mountains, because the other time when this saying
he
is
said,
given,
if you want to say move a mountain, it will be moved.
yeah, this is in Matthew 17, verse 20, because
Okay.
their problem why they couldn't cast out a demon was because of their little faith. And then he said, I tell you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible to you.
Yeah, interesting.
And 1 Corinthians 13, if I can remove mountains, I have so much to this kind of faith, I can move mountains. There it is, mulberry trees and mountains and so on.
Well, it's to prove a point. We shouldn't take it literally.
I think we should.
But faith, we need to have a lot of faith because to get along in this world, I don't know how you could cope with the trials that come every day unless you had a Heavenly Father that you could turn to in time of need. Yeah. And that's faith. Faith is like a child's faith.
But you say a lot of faith, but here it says if they said increase our faith. And he says, but if you had faith, even the size of a mustard seed, it would have such great potentiality within it that you could say such and so. So
is
little
that why
faith,
some people wear a little thing around their neck? It's got a mustard seed in it.
Sure.
Have you seen those?
That's the reason.
Yeah. Well.
Now I don't know if
that's a talisman. That's magic. We're back to magic again, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Except as we take it as a metaphoric reminder, which has its own value. We might. Yeah, I think Jesus is speaking much as we have, and we would concur. We might wish, however, that he had not chosen this particular way of saying it in that case. After all, this is a church, after Jesus' time on earth, that is under real persecution. They're having a hard time keeping their faith. And I'm not sure what a saying like this would have done for them in that context. A mustard seed, well, many of them may have indeed wanted to have faith just to open a prison door before next Sunday afternoon when we face the lions. You know. So again, I think John, you were barking up the right mulberry tree here when you said, well, again, this is always contingent upon the divine will. That, at least, I think we have to acknowledge, lest we reduce faith to some mechanical kind of rather mindless sort of thing. You know, at least that.
But John, you talk about people under pressure and persecution.
Yeah.
Now, I would imagine, see, because I think we're invited by this. If we recognize that it's metaphorical in some way, then we have to say, well, what kinds of things it would refer to?
Yeah.
Now, you refer to a situation of persecution, and that's an excellent one. If I were to ask God to be with me faith-wise in this, I think what I might be asking for is not take away the persecution. We know that those things continue, but help me to get through this. Help me to have sufficient faith and trust in you that I can make it to the other side. Because otherwise, I've got two options, you know.
Yeah.
I'm going to be persecuted, and I've got to get rid of it totally, or I can't go on. Or the persecution's going to remain, and I've got to somehow survive it. And so I think by our faith, we can, which has to mean our trust in God, does it not?
Surely. Yeah.
That we can make it.
Let's put it in a more contemporary style. For instance, you're talking about the people who were going through persecution in this time when this was written.
Anytime.
But what about in our day and age when, say, you lose something? You lose a diamond ring, and you've looked all over the house. This is a literal story. Looked everywhere, even gone through the trash, all the trash, before the man picks it up. And you cannot find that ring, but you prayed about it. And all of a sudden, your little dog, little princess, comes up. I mean, you've been down on the floor and you've looked all around the edge, all these places. And your little dog has something that she's got in her mouth and is nosing. And you look, and there's your diamond ring. Now, this went over a period of probably a day or two. Now, do you think God answered my prayer? Or is that just a coincidence? Hello? I don't see everybody has their hand up at once.
Well, what does your faith tell you?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. I took it as a literal answer because the diamond that was in there was from my aunt, from my husband's aunt, and I had it set in a ring, and I had put it in my pocket, evidently, and when I had taken off something or other, it fell down, and my little dog found it and brought it to me. That's the only thing I can figure, because I tried to go backwards and think, now how could she find it? This isn't magic. And I got to thinking, I slipped it in a pocket, and then evidently when I removed my garment, it fell on the floor, and it was right there where it was. I had looked, and Ralph had looked in so many times, and there it was. And
well, if Peter could catch the right fish with the coin in its mouth.
yes, there you go.
Who are we to say?
Yeah.
I think is the bottom line answer there.
Well, I can tell you a story from a few days ago. Like this.
Okay.
I've had arguments, friendly arguments, you know, very friendly arguments with a couple of my associate pastors over whether we ought to pray for trivial things. And I've been on the side that no, I don't pray, for instance, for the Lord to find parking places for me. I figured he shouldn't have to manipulate the universe for my parking needs.
I've done that. I've done that because I don't want to walk a long ways, and I don't want some guy coming up and snatching my purse. And I've just breathed a prayer. Lord, please help me to find something close. What's wrong with that?
Well, I don't know. We can talk about it. So I've had this discussion with my associate pastor. Okay.
Did she agree with you?
Well, no, I have to tell the story.
Oh,
so
sure.
I was at a hospital visiting one of our parishioners, and I had gone around for about 20 minutes trying to find a parking place. And I wanted to see this person before I had to go to another appointment, and wasn't sure I was ever going to find a parking. And I had to confess to my colleague that I finally said, Lord, you know I don't pray for things like this, but it sure would be nice to get to see this person before I have to go and find a parking place. And right at that moment, a woman walked out the door and said, I'm going to leave right over there. And I got that parking, and my associate pastors laughed and said, the Lord is trying to teach you something.
I agree with you, associate pastor.
That's good.
Did you learn anything from that? Well,
John, this was not for your convenience. I mean,
that's the
let's
way
get
I
that in
feel,
there.
too.
You know? It's not like you were at some shopping mall and
there was a reason behind it.
And if there was an equally valid kingdom reason behind moving this mulberry tree, we could talk about that.
And John, do you think maybe God was saying, you know, John doesn't think I'm interested in little things like this, but I have a lot of angels, and his guardian angel, I mean, you know, we have pretty good communication, so I'm going to increase his faith today. I mean, you know, it could be. So now, do you find that? Do you feel that God answered your prayer? Because it was a legitimate prayer.
I'm certainly not going to say he didn't.
Yeah.
But I'm also not going to get in the habit of praying for God to manipulate the universe so that I can have the right parking places.
What about you, Ivan?
Well, I'm thinking of a talk of some kind to, oh, you of little faith over little faith, something in that vein. Well, I'll tell you, without that as a specific right now, because you've led us into the theology of parking places here. But I wonder how many of us actually just skip over this. These couple of verses, precisely because it says something that seems quite outlandish. In other words, understanding it from a literal point of view. We're talking about mulberry trees, rather than that God will be with you in your life and will help things to turn away that would be of benefit to you and to others as well. But I'm afraid that things like this go unnoticed because they're so strikingly, seemingly unreal. Now, I want to take this seriously. And it seems to say to me, little faith has great potentiality. That when the disciples say, increase our faith, God says, well, that's maybe important, but you do have some faith, do you not? Yes, Lord, I do. Well, let's see if you can exercise that, because it has great potentialities. You want more faith, but if you would act on the little faith that you have, maybe later on I could give you more faith. But I want you to see that little faith, having questions, maybe some doubts and all that, but still saying, I believe there's a God in heaven who he has a providence. Maybe that's what we need, you know, and I have to start to examine myself to see just where do I trust God and where do I not trust God? And do I trust him enough that he will kind of help me through this and that and the other thing?
Did you want to say something, John?
Only that we have these moments. I don't want to string this out unduly, but I remember really trying to protect God once long ago on the other side of the world. Newly converted family who had come out of another religious background into Christianity. They were the fishing family, lived aboard a boat. They had just been accepted Christ. Now they're setting out at the beginning of the fishing season. They had read all the stories. We went out Sabbath afternoon to dedicate their boat. A lot of excitement in the air, everybody setting out. They couldn't wait to see the nets breaking with fish. And I kept hedging, you know, this is up to God. If it's the Lord's will, this can be. But in any event, Jesus is with you anyhow, and so forth. I don't think they heard any of it. They weren't listening to me. They were not in a position to hear me. I would have loved to have gone out with them that night, as I have on other occasions before and after, but that particular evening I had to get back to school. Next morning I went out, well, it's in the afternoon before I could get back out there. They were so excited. They had literally nearly broken their nets with the fish. And once again, I thought the good Lord was tapping me on the shoulder, you know. And I went home and said, Lord, please don't ever let this happen again, that my lack of faith gets in the way of what you want to do for people.
Good for you.
So here we are. Yes, where do we draw the line is the question we're each asking. And the answer is we really don't know, do we, finally? There's a temptation to turn to God, and there's a temptation to not turn to God. And they're both temptations, aren't they, at times? So we need to understand that the divine will overrides, but that we pray within that divine will as best we can. Always.
Do you think that when people pray for certain things that seem inconsequential to maybe you scholars, but to us they're kind of important, and He answers your prayer, to me it increases my faith even more. And I don't go around talking about it, but in my heart I know He's answered my prayer. So I'm just saying there's nothing wrong with people who, like John said, newly converted people just find Jesus, and they want to ask the Lord to help them with their fishing. And John is saying, no, I've got to help them because I don't want them to get too excited, because maybe there won't be any fish tonight. You know, there's Satan and all this. Well, I know exactly how he feels, because I have felt like I have had to make an excuse for maybe somebody whose prayers weren't answered. But Graham Maxwell has a beautiful way. When you pray for somebody who has a malignant disease and you know he's going to die and you know he's prayed about it and so forth and so on, and he dies. So Graham Maxwell says, well, He's answered their prayer, not in this life, but He will give them a new body and they'll be in heaven. So I thought that was a good way to look at it for when you pray for the sick. And maybe they don't make it, but they will be healed.
Well, I know a very specific person who was a missionary. And maybe I've told this story before. There's nothing new under the sun, so I think I could have. But he had a very swift-moving cancer, and he was praying, and his wife was praying, and many others were praying. And here was his statement: I believe that God will hear my prayer, and He will hear me. He will heal me today. And if not today, then He will heal me tomorrow. And if not tomorrow, then next week. And he kept going. And if not next week, next month. And if not next month, next year. And if not, then He will heal me when Jesus comes again. And he actually said that's an actual statement.
Isn't that beautiful?
And that is beautiful. That's real faith. And he did die. He was not healed. His cancer was a terrible one. But he still rests in that promise that God will bring that.
He will heal him.
Healing.
He'll have a new body. And so you can say, well, God didn't answer his prayer. God did answer his prayer in the resurrection.
Right. Maybe we should say...
that's what we have to cling to.
Maybe we should say that God, as God, is the answer to our prayers. And in His freedom, and you know, I have my moments of darkness, but right now, in His freedom, He is free to act, and my task, if I can call it a task, is to trust Him, that He will act not only in my best interest, but our best interests. So we have to protect the freedom of God, too.
Yes.
Not try to, so to speak, force God's
That's right.
hand.
Well, that's right. And sometimes God says no.
Well, quite obviously,
He
yeah. I
says no.
have a book I use in one of my classes, and it's by a fellow who lost 3 generations of his family in an automobile accident. And the name of the book is When God Answers Prayer No. Oh, no, When God Doesn't Answer Your Prayers. And the whole book is about unanswered prayer.
Interesting.
Very important. And you say, well, what is his answer? Well, in the final analysis, he gives many possibilities, but see, when it comes down to it, you still have to leave it in the hand of God. You
Yes.
cannot predict, you cannot force.
That's right. But isn't there a story in the Old Testament about a king? I can't remember his name, but he was going to die. And he prayed and carried on with God, please.
Talking about Hezekiah?
Yes. And you can go ahead and tell that, because I don't remember exactly, except that I know that God said, okay, I'll give you a few more years. And then what happened?
I'll let some of my storytelling friend John is the great storyteller.
Well, he did live longer, but not everything was just the way he would like to have had it work out in his life after that.
One wonders if he mightn't have been just as well off.
Yes.
So, well, my point being, we don't know the end from the beginning, but God does know. And if he sees something that he feels would be detrimental if he answered the prayer in just the way we wanted, he doesn't answer it, and we may not know this side of the kingdom why he didn't answer it the way we wanted him to.
Well, please forgive me if I've told this one before, and I may have again. My brother is before me in a hospital in Detroit. He is dying. All of the systems are failing. He is going. He has lived a life in alcohol, and it has caught up with him. So I'm standing there and I'm saying, Lord, you're the creator of the universe. Even with his liver problem and all the rest, you can heal him. And in my mind's eye, or in my mind's ear, I hear a voice saying, do you really want me to bring him back to this life? Because he had now made his peace with God and everything, you know. He had affirmed his acceptance of God and his kingdom and his forgiveness and so on. And that, I actually had that thought in my head, and I thought of some of the what he was living in and some of the heartaches he felt from certain family things and the things that really troubled him so much that it even increased the tempo of his drinking. And then I thought, I've got to rest this in God's hands. I've prayed, I'd like him to be healed, but you know, it's in God's hand, because maybe coming back to this life, there are circumstances that, you know, would overcome him again. So maybe rest in peace and rest in God.
So the question is, which prayer meets your needs and which prayer met his needs?
Yeah, a very good distinction.
Yeah, we need to remember it, don't we? Yeah. Well, this mustard seed and this mulberry tree have taught us a thing or two, haven't they?
We've lingered quite a
I
while.
just have to ask this question. Have we
that?
just been running around the mulberry tree?
I was waiting for that.
Okay. Okay, verse 7 here, chapter 17.
We're down to
Go
3
ahead.
minutes, and this deserves more than we can give it here.
Okay.
But just briefly, well, perhaps we'll get the story out in front of us. Verses 7 through 10, a punchy little example here. Not really a parable. The text in many versions says, what person among you who has a hired hand or a servant or a slave? You've come in together from plowing or tending the sheep in the field, would say, come here at once and take your place at the table. Would you not rather say to him, you prepare supper for me, put on your apron and serve me while I eat and drink, and later on you may eat and drink, at least if there's anything left. Do you thank the slave for doing what was commanded? So also you, when you've done all that you were ordered to do, you must say, we are worthless slaves. We have only done what we ought to have done. Now, this deserves more than we can give it here at the moment, but for the moment it's an interesting little illustration of how parables work. This is not a parable, it's a challenge story. But the parables are, all of them, challenge stories. Part of our difficulty with the parables is that we put a halo around them. We've heard them before, we're familiar with them, and we think that they are sweet and pious little moral lessons of some kind. We lose the punchiness of them. I haven't heard anyone ever preach from this, although it would make a great sermon. But perhaps next time we can unpack it in a little more detail and see how this story functions in the lives of the farming people to whom Jesus was really speaking. He certainly got their attention when, with his opening sentence, said, "Who of you working out in the field having a hired hand or a slave or a servant?" Because any of us who has even weeded a garden has thought at moments, man, I wish I had somebody out here to help me.
Yes.
So he had them with him. Every one of them had thought those thoughts under the blazing sun, those hard scrabble farmers.
Blazing sun.
Yeah.
Blazing sun. Those farmers who eked out a living was not easy. So they were all nudging each other at the moment when he started.
Well, you've referred it to the farmers in the story. I'm sure they would have said, what? I would never have asked my servant to eat with me. But I'd like to make a recommendation to us. Are we at the end?
We're at the end.
We're at the end. I've heard you say that before, Carol. At the very end?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to wait, because I have a recommendation.
You do?
I
I can't wait.
Next time.
Next time, that's right. Well, you know, I think we have talked about faith. I didn't know we'd be doing that this evening, but sometimes the Lord leads us into discussions that we didn't know were going to take place. And I hope that our listening audience, our viewing audience, has been blessed by our illustrations of faith. And until next time, we hope you'll join us as we keep searching for answers. And we do keep searching.